Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for the talk, Ayurveda versus Allopathy, the Politics of Scientific Knowledge, organized by Foundation for Creative Social Research, as well as Knowledge and Practice Group. Foundation for Creative Social Research, I'll introduce the first two, the organization as well as the group, and then I'll move on to the chair as well as the speakers for the session. The Foundation for Creative Social Research sets to create a discursive space for interaction among academics, writers, artists, poets, social activists, and policy makers. It intends to fill up the gap between the intellectuals and common people in the society. For this purpose, the Foundation initiates a series of dialogues on various issues of contemporary relevance and among people from different walks of life. Through these dialogues, the Foundation aims at influencing the process of knowledge production and dissemination. It emphasizes the need of shifting the terms of knowledge discourse by questioning all the established universals. It argues for accepting the emergentist nature of knowledge so that experiences of different times and spaces could be accommodated in the construction of ever-evolving universals. Our Knowledge and Practice Group was conceptualized in 2003 with an objective to create a blueprint of the text and practices specific to various traditions and societies. There has been a continued engagement between the members of the group and the varied practicing communities of respective knowledge traditions across different parts of India, including Nyaya and Mimamsa tradition of Mithila, Tantric tradition of Mayang in Assam, Sufi traditions located on the Silk Route between Afghanistan and India, the Panchkosi Mela in Buxar region, and the Navya Nyaya tradition of Bengal. Our chair for this session, and thank you, ma'am, for accepting it, is Dr. Ritu Priya. Dr. Ritu Priya is a medical graduate with a doctorate in community health. She's a professor at the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She was an advisor of public health planning with the National Health Systems Resource Center, a technical support institution under the National Rural Health Mission, and has been member of task forces of the Planning Commission, the department, as well as the Ministry of Ayush, the National AIDS Control Organization, and the Indian Council for Medical Research. She was the founder, coordinator of the Transdisciplinary Research Cluster on Plural Healthcare and the founder member of the Transdisciplinary Cluster on Sustainable Studies at JNU. She has also been an active participant in civil society groups and health movement networks. Her interdisciplinary work links epidemiology, popular culture, political economy, and health system research for decentralized planning, policy formulation, and analysis of healthcare. It has been specifically focused on health of marginalized groups, problems of nutrition and communicable diseases, health systems development, health governance, and the politics of health knowledge, including relevance of traditional systems. Our speaker for this session is first Dr. Kishor Patwardhan. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. Professor Kishor Patwardhan currently works for the Department of Kriya Sharif, Faculty of Ayurveda, Banaras Hindu University. He is involved in developing and evaluating different teaching learning methods for Kriya Sharif. He has lectured in India and abroad on various topics such as Ayurveda, physiology, academic writing, research methods, educational research, and educational policy. He has received Ayush-sponsored Vaidya Scientist Fellowship from TDU Bangalore. His research interests include Ayurveda biology, Ayurveda education, and policies on higher education. He is a recipient of Dr. C. Dwarkanath Award of Indian Association for the Study of Traditional Asian Medicine for the year 2019. He is an editorial board member of the Journal of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine. He has also worked as a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of IPGT and RA Jamnagar, CCRAS, and School of Life Sciences, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. He is the coordinator and principal investigator of Ayurveda Network, a component under subject-based network of scheme of MHRD, Government of India. Our second speaker for the session is Dr. V.Sujatha. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us as well. Dr. V.Sujatha is a professor at the Center for the Study of Social Systems, Schools of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She specializes in the field of sociology of knowledge and sociology of health and medicine. Her research focuses on the dynamic interface between traditional medical knowledge, social structure, and state policy. Her book titled Health by the People, 2003, highlighted the significance of medical lore and uncodified medical knowledge in rural South India, and her monograph, Sociology of Health and Medicine, New Perspectives, 2014, brought medical pluralism into the theoretical ambit of sociology of medicine. The special issue edited by her titled Globalization of South Asian Medicine, Knowledge, Power, Structure, and Sustainability maps the invisible flows of body-mind practices like yoga, Buddhist meditation, as well as things like herbs and whole food grains from the global south for the elite consumers of the global north. Ma'am's most recent edited volume, Global Capital and Social Difference, 2020, proposes nuanced inquiries into the relationship between economy, society, and polity as an alternative to the mainstream theories of globalization that heavily focus on capital and technology. Our last but definitely not least speaker for this session is Dr. Madhulika Banerjee. Thank you also, ma'am, for joining us today. Dr. Madhulika Banerjee is professor of political science at the University of Delhi and has taught mainstream political science since 1985 and research on margins of the discipline during the same period. Her book, Power, Knowledge, Medicine, Ayurvedic Pharmaceuticals at Home and in the World, published by Orient Black Swan in 2009, and her work on Ayurveda is widely presented and published. She now teaches a course titled Politics of Knowledge at the master's and the research coursework level and has just concluded the ICSSR sponsored research program for 2 years along with a team of researchers and collaborators entitled Knowledge, Development and Politics in Post-Colonial India, Contestations in State, Market and Civil Society. They have published the outcomes of this research in a series of articles in the studies in Indian politics, some already published and others are forthcoming. Her article, Politics of Knowledge and Development, an Analytical Frame, expects to take the argument of this area forward. Thank you everybody for joining as well as the audience. I'll give the floor to the chair and thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shelja. And I think it's great to have this. We had Rakesh's presentation last month, and now this the big Indian debate in an area which is hotly contested for the last 100 years, where integration has been talked of and yet not brought into any kind of common understanding of rural policy level. And we've seen it again highly contested in COVID times. The whole issue and its relationship, I think we need to step back a bit and look at the way we have societal moorings of knowledge, with scientific temper being a responsibility set out in our constitution. But it also has the technologies, their production, the markets, and the education, training of practitioners, all this on one hand, and the development of systems for service delivery as well. So it's this whole range, and they're all interacting parts of the system which certainly affect each other. Therefore, it becomes a complex area where all these dimensions need to be unraveled. And therefore, I think the panel today, which is of academics who are all, at one level, they're not in a debating frame. They're all advocates of medical pluralism and integration. And if maybe everybody may not agree with integration, but appropriate utilization and space to diverse systems in healthcare. So, including myself, but we all come from different disciplinary backgrounds, and that I think is what should be the focus, give us the focus of this discussion, where we've just heard about Professor Patwardhan being a practitioner, teacher, and researcher of Ayurveda. I come with an MBBS degree, but with research and practice in the sphere of public health and health policy. And then Madhulika and Banerjee coming from political science and with long researching healthcare and traditional medicine from the vantage point of politics of knowledge. While Professor Sujatha brings with her sociological lens to engage with this whole arena of lived tradition and modern change in knowledge and practice. So, while at one level it becomes very easily dichotomized into modern and traditional, and traditional and modernity become one kind of frame. But I think we are in the discourse that is there, we are well beyond that, at least in the academic sphere. At the policy level, we don't seem to see that. And in popular media, again, we don't seem to see that. So that, I think, is the challenge before all those in the panel today. And we keep going back to a whole range of these questions. So I just like to flag three broad areas which seem to encompass this debate of putting it as allopathy versus Ayurveda. It's one about the claims of science and knowledge. What is science, and what are the points of to be considered knowledge, and what is superstition and belief? The second, therefore, what is the basis of validation of these claims, and therefore the whole methodological issue of validation. And as a society, how do we validate? And third, about the implications of the diversity of epistemology and ontologies for policy and systems development. How do policymakers make sense of this? And this is all despite the fact that at a popular level, it seems from all studies that one sees, from the anthropological and sociological dimension, certainly, that people at large are happy to use diverse epistemological frames and whatever they think is appropriate to use in healthcare. So this debate at one level is coming from the scientific disciplinary frames and not in real life at the social societal level, but it's very much there at the policy level. This is something we need to sort of keep as some kind of a backdrop. And if these are the kind of questions that we are going to address, and I'm hoping that's what our three panelists will, at the end somewhere we need to have a discussion on, therefore, knowing the hierarchy that does exist. What is it that we need to be doing and handling and dealing with? How do we deal with it? What are the strategies, the likes of us who are all for the plural approach, how do we see this? So can we, at one level, while we are all from that frame and therefore not in the debate frame, can we talk about what are the two sides of the debate as our panelists view it? The scientific fundamentalists on one side and the pluralists on the other. I would put it that way rather than saying allopathy and Ayurveda or modern and traditional. And but I'll leave that now to the panelists to really take on from there. And Professor Kishor Patwardhan first. So I think about 10 to 15 minutes is what you've said, Shailja?
Yeah? Yes, 10 to 15 minutes.
Professor Patwardhan?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for those words of introduction and also setting up the stage for the right kind of discussion. Basically, this is a very interesting panel that we have who are from diverse backgrounds. So this is truly a good thing to have. So ancient, this is how I would like to put ancient versus modern medical sciences. So this is the debate, and I usually avoid using the term allopathy because it was invented coined somewhere in 1800s by the Hahnemann who invented homeopathy. So it was just against homeopathy that he coined this term. So now we should not be using this term anymore. This is what I feel. Anyways, so can I have my next slide, please? Yeah.
Is it visible?
Yes, visible? Yeah. Yes, it is visible. Yeah. So let me start my discussion with who am I? So what do I represent and what is my background? So I don't represent a defensive mindset like Ayurveda is absolute truth, or it is a complete science in itself, or it is not amenable to be challenged. So I don't hold such rigid views as such. I represent a progressive Ayurveda community that is comfortable with asking questions, that encourages skepticism and accepts and even criticizes the flaws in the system. And I am an admirer of all knowledge that emerges out of robust scientific inquiry, including modern medicine. So this is my background. So I should be very clear. That's why I have put up this slide as my first slide. And I'm a known critical insider. So I'm known for criticism of my own the field rather. So and have been closely observing the sector for more than 2 decades from an academic viewpoint. So this is my background. So next slide, please. Yeah. So this debate, why and for whom is this debate exist? Does this debate exist? So actually, this debate is a non-issue to an average Ayurveda practitioner, or even for that matter, a modern medicine practitioner. They are not bothered about this debate at all, to be very, very clear. Now, who wants this debate to be alive? So politics, power, and commercial interests. So these are at the center of this entire debate. And in my presentation, what I will be highlighting is both left and right-wing politics are ignoring the larger public health interests by invoking this debate. This is what my point that I will be highlighting in today's discussion. So next one, please. So, yeah, these are certain public health issues of paramount importance when it comes to Ayurveda, like poor standards of marketed products, maybe adulterants, they contain of sometimes steroids, antibiotics, heavy metals, and so on. So these are really a matter of public health concern. Lack of credible high grade evidence, maybe for example, systematic reviews or meta-analysis, they're not there to show that Ayurveda interventions really work. Then maybe there are adverse reactions or toxicity issues, or sometimes even misleading advertisements, or maybe many drugs being sold as OTC products. So these are certain real challenges that sector is facing, and there is no mechanism for evidence-informed policy making. So policy making is arbitrary. There is nothing like for example, the policy that might be implemented in Kerala may not be suitable to be implemented in Uttar Pradesh or Bihar, because the health-seeking behavior, the literacy levels, the population density, and so on and so forth. So there is huge difference between state to state and region to region. So all this is ignored when it comes to policy making in Ayurveda or Ayush sector. So these are certain real issues. Yes, next one, please. So yeah, now many governments, they say that, yeah, we are here to promote Ayurveda. So what do they mean by promoting Ayurveda? This is the question that I would like to ask. So what do the policymakers think when they say that, yes, our government or our whatever, right, we are here to promote you? So what do they mean by promotion? So does it mean that establishing a separate ministry is real promotion? Establishing new standalone Ayush universities or colleges, is that promoting Ayurveda? Organizing international events to popularize Ayurveda? Encouraging the marketing of medicinal plants and products and exports and contributing to economy, is that what do they mean by promotion? Protecting the interests of industry or practitioners, is that promotion? Or promoting tourism, or maybe cultivation of medicinal plants or marketing and so on? Or is it building evidence base or promoting scientific inquiry into Ayurveda? Is that the real promotion? And lastly, the public health interest. So what should be the meaning of promotion? So this is what I want to ask. So I think we have misplaced our priorities, and the promoting Ayurveda or promotion of Ayurveda means different things to different people. And this is what I would like to highlight. Actually, in my understanding, the last two should be the most important priorities. But unfortunately, that these are the two fields which have been ignored. Yeah, next one, please. Yeah, now I would like to mention a very important paper that has formed my views actually, especially when it comes to the politics of Ayurveda. So we know right-wing politics and left-wing politics now. So Hindu nationalist ideas make Ayurveda a pseudoscience by misappropriating it with modern science. This is from Professor Alan Sokal's paper. He is a physicist, renowned physicist, and he has written many interesting articles related to pseudoscience and how societies are responding to pseudoscience. So he argues that, for example, we can see that people saying that Ganesha's invoking Ganesha and saying that the surgeries where elephant's head could be joined with human body were existing during ancient periods. So this is one gross example, but many of Hindu nationalist idealists, what they are doing is they are saying that all modern cutting edge research has already been documented in ancient textbooks. So this is what their major kind of claim is. And they use modern science to validate ancient statements. This is something that is worth noting down. Now, coming to postmodernists, the left-wing activists or left-wing proponents, what do is they project Ayurveda as though it is a legitimate alternative to the modern science and calling it local health traditions. But they suspect the credibility of modern science itself. So by suspecting the credibility of modern science, the postmodernists, they project Ayurveda as a legitimate alternative. So they call modern science as Western ethno-science. And they suggest that standard research methods are not applicable for Ayurveda because of epistemological issues. So both are mostly ignorant of true scientific method and its universality. This is what he argues. And I think he's right when he says this. And both are fellow travelers and not antagonists. Ultimately, this is what he concludes. Even the Hindu nationalists and the postmodernists, both of them are fellow travelers and not antagonists. This is what he concludes by giving these examples. Yes, next one, please. So now, my observations on this issue: most of the influential proponents of Ayurveda are not formally trained in Ayurveda, right? And their interest is either academic or research or maybe profiteering, and hence they do not know the dilemmas an Ayurveda graduate goes through. They find Ayurveda fanciful or charming because they do not have to earn their daily bread using Ayurveda, right? So most of the proponents of Ayurveda, they are not trained properly or formally, rather. Formally, they are not trained in Ayurveda. Now, similarly, most of the opponents who oppose Ayurveda, they are not aware of the strengths of Ayurveda. They just brush aside Ayurveda as pseudoscience. And their opinions are formed mostly because of the adverse drug reactions or toxicity issues and a lack of proper published evidence, credible evidence. So these are the issues that matter to these people who oppose Ayurveda. So this is fundamentally the difference between the two groups, the opposers and the proponents. Yes, next one, please. So a few more important relevant observations. All governments in the past have indirectly encouraged modern medicine prescription by Ayurveda doctors. And in my opinion, this is to cover up the inability to produce required number of trained MBBS doctors and to make medical education affordable. So governments, they are unable to make medical education affordable, and they are also unable to produce the required number of trained MBBS doctors. Hence, they have always encouraged indirectly, not directly, but yes, of course, during last few years, it is direct also. We'll come to that. For example, the surgery issue recently, they have the Ayurveda doctors have been allowed to practice so many surgeries. Similarly, in many states, prescription of modern medicine by Ayurvedic graduates is legal. It has been legalized. So, and this has made Ayurveda to be viewed as a backdoor entry to become doctors. And Ayush sector has always been viewed as a cheap workforce, alternative or cheap workforce. Say they need not be paid high salaries and so on and so forth. So MBBS curricula do not contain discussion on alternative systems of medicine. They are totally unaware of what is going on in alternative systems. And this situation is leading to the antagonism and debate. So why this debate is coming up is because of these strategies or these rather policies, maybe overt or maybe covert or whatever. But this is the background of this entire debate as far as my understanding goes. Yes, next one, please. So these are the major issues that Ayurveda sector is facing, like poor standard of education, poor clinical exposure. There are no patients, no infrastructure, no hospitals, but we are distributing the degrees, mushrooming low quality colleges, poor infrastructure, curricula contain too many impractical and outdated contents, no standard protocols for diagnosis and treatment, no too much of individual variation, and even individualization, or when it comes to the individualized treatment, it is also not standard. It varies from individual vaidya to individual vaidya. This is another thing, right? So no research orientation, lack of scientific temper. For instance, principles and theories of Ayurveda are never questioned. And this is anti-scientific attitude. They are taken as the starting point of every research. Virtually every research starts with the understanding that, for example, Tridosha theory is final, right? Let us not challenge it. But actually, science doesn't grow that way. Science keeps asking questions on the credibility of even the established theories, right? So archaic ways of teaching, no freedom to question and criticize, and maybe sometimes it is borderline fanaticism in certain colleges, and we know this, right? No formal means of for interacting with other counterparts, and this is leading to professional rivalry and practicing modern medicine and surgery without adequate training. So these are the issues that we are actually facing, but nobody is talking about these issues. Yes, next one, please. Yes, another important paper I would like to mention over here is Professor Stephen Engler's paper, Science versus Religion in Classical Ayurveda. He examines Ayurveda thoroughly by adopting the parameters that are used to define the current sciences, like materialism, empiricism, quantification, experimentation, verification and falsification, and theory modification. So he applies each of these principles to Ayurveda and examines whether Ayurveda shows fits into these criteria. And it examines the claims that the Ayurveda tradition was scientific, but concludes that Ayurveda does not fit into the current definition of science, though Ayurveda has certain empirical characteristics. So Vedic religious elements are too central to be excluded. This is what he concludes. So these are certain things which come out of serious studies. Next one, please. Now, my understanding is that scientific method is universal. There cannot be Western science or Oriental science. When it comes to science, science is universal. Scientific method is universal. So Western and Oriental science is an artificial division. Simply because the method evolved in the West, one cannot call it Western science. The steps like observation, hypothesis, experimentation, theory modification, reproducibility, falsification are the steps all sciences should follow, and they follow. And Ayurveda should claim no exemption from this. This is what I believe. In fact, in principle, even Ayurveda has always advocated this. It has advocated that repeated examination only can lead to a theory, proposition of a theory. So this has been documented very well in Charaka Samhita also. So Ayurveda is also based on the logic of natural sciences that prevailed in the ancient times, like Nyaya Vaisheshika, Sankhya Yoga, Vedanta schools of philosophy. See, current biomedical sciences or modern medicine is based on the current natural sciences like physics, chemistry, molecular biology, genetics, and so on. Similarly, Ayurveda was based in ancient times on those natural sciences which were prevalent in those times, like Nyaya Vaisheshika. Right? So that is how Ayurveda is definitely scientific. But yes, now if we want to make it relevant to the times, then the contemporary scientific methods have to be invoked. So pharmacoepidemiology and reverse pharmacology, maybe these are two very important approaches that might help us in building evidence base for Ayurveda. Yes, next one, please. So yes, this is one important observation Dr. G.L. Krishna has made in one of his blog posts on BMJ blog on medical humanities. He says that the Ministry of Ayush, Government of India, recently issued an advisory that reiterated its long-held official view that the principles, concepts, and approaches of Ayurveda are not at all comparable with those of modern medical systems. So this happens to be the official view that is being held by Ayush Ministry. But this view of an absolute dichotomy between the two systems implicitly disputes the universality of the scientific method. This is something very, very important, and we need to ponder upon this point. Next one, please. Yeah, COVID-19 exposed all the fault lines. And one of my articles published in the Hindu, I have enumerated all those happenings that fetched a bad name to Ayurveda. Yes, next one, please. For example, all earlier focus and advocacy on the role of Ayurveda in NCDs, non-communicable diseases, shifted to infectious diseases overnight. Always we argued that Ayurveda has got its potential in NCDs, non-communicable diseases. But once the COVID came in, suddenly all of us became infectious disease experts. Social media became the platform to showcase the purported success stories. Tall claims based on small or poorly designed studies started making rounds. No credible data of COVID cure was made available, right? And most importantly, profiteering overtook public health concerns. This is what my observation is. Yes, next one, please. So scientists, activists calling out unjustified claims from Ayush sector were alleged of indulging in defamatory activities. Advertisements in the name of immune boosting became rampant. We know that immune boosting is not a very a term that has got too many connotations and not a very clear term and ambiguous and potentially misleading, of course. Claims like 100% cure or prevention were made and received indirect support from the sector. Failure of remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, plasma therapy was used to defend these propagandists' attempts. So this is what we have all seen, right? And as a result, allopathy versus Ayurveda became a point of hot debate. And disconnectedness between Ayush and Ministry of Health and Family Welfare became obvious because Ayush protocol for COVID-19 and ICMR protocol for COVID-19 management were totally disconnected. There were no connections whatsoever which were noted. Yes, next one, please. So what is the need of the hour? So understand the dilemmas an Ayurveda graduates goes through. Recognize the limitations of pure Ayurveda when it comes to when it is not backed up by current biomedical insights of disease. I keep saying that if you propagate or support the notion of pure Ayurveda, it is going to be a disaster. A time will come when a patient of acute MI will be treated by purgations and so on. So we don't want that to happen, right? Pure Ayurveda without having insights from modern medicine, it is going to be a disaster. Let us admit it. Preserving the tradition needs to be achieved by not compromising with public health. Regulate the marketing of untested patent and proprietary products. Regulate misleading advertisements. Recently, there was an advertisement saying that hypertension is incurable is a myth. And see, this is how we are making antihypertensive drugs and OTC product. See, these are the issues that we need to challenge and ask questions about. So merging institutions and making them multidisciplinary. Instead of establishing standalone institutions, Ayush universities, Ayush colleges, Ayush aims, instead of doing that, why don't we merge different institutions and make them multidisciplinary so that dialogue can be established. So as long as we don't get into this merging kind of thing, we keep isolating the things, and this we always will continue to fuel this debate of allopathy versus Ayurveda. So evolve a mechanism to ensure that Ayush Ministry and Minister of Health and Family Welfare are have a united vision and mission. Yes, last one, please. I think this is going to be my last slide. Next one, please.
Can I just please request everybody else to mute themselves, those who are not speaking?
So how to end this debate? Yeah, these are my suggestions. So India must stop being an advocate of parallel model of pluralistic healthcare. So pluralistic healthcare is, yes, definitely we are advocates of pluralistic healthcare, but probably we should stop, or rather we should rethink of parallel model of pluralistic healthcare and must consider moving towards an integrative model. Maybe there are certain nations like Vietnam, China, or maybe they may not be ideal. Then there could be so many loopholes in those systems as well. But we can have our own system. One policy that I liked, which was floated recently, was one nation, one healthcare system. And I think it should be realized at the earliest. For example, the common graduate program should allow for post-graduation in desired streams of specialization, including Ayush. So let there be a common graduate level program, after graduating which one should be made eligible to pursue either Ayurveda or Unani, Siddha, or whatever specialization he or she wishes, so that this debate will conclude, and there will not be any further debates of this kind. So professional rivalry would stop, all futile debates will stop. So Ayush versus modern science will become Ayush and modern science. So yeah, one more slide, please. Last one. Yeah. So I would like to quote Richard Feynman, where he says that we are trying to prove ourselves wrong as quickly as possible, because only in that way can we find progress. So I think we have to take this as our mantra and relook at our own policies and systems, and try to find out the faults and then achieve progress. Yeah, with this, I conclude my points. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Patwardhan. And I think that set out very clearly the scientific, fundamental, and purist position on one side, but he's clearly taking dialogic position, but also coming from that dialogue to an integrative health system, where these different epistemological streams do not remain in parallel. And a one nation, one healthcare system. I think I'll go into calling on Dr. Sujatha to come in right now and come to address some of the issues that Dr. Patwardhan has raised, but also, of course, what it is that she would like to present. Sujatha?
Okay. So thank you, Professor Ritu, Priya, and thank you, Creative Theory Colloquium. I think your debates have always been vibrant and of great interest to me. You young and all kinds of scholars come, so I'm happy to participate in this. What I thought I'll do today is I want to take 3 points. Several questions have been raised in the concept note. So I want to focus on 3 questions, and I'm happy I can connect to what Dr. Kishor Patwardhan said. So like pieces of a puzzle, I'm sure the hearers will also make those connection. I want to take up the question of science and non-science. And then also on proprietary drugs, why some people should be foregrounded while there is a wide knowledge. That was one of the questions. Also, if there is time, I'll take up the question of caste. So I just have 3 main points. I make my points by drawing attention to certain labels that we use. And by drawing on some observations in sociology and philosophy of medicine, I want to address these labels. Already Dr. Patwardhan focused. He said the term allopathy is not used nowadays, and especially not in connection with Ayurveda, because allopathy makes sense as an antithesis to homeopathy. Because it is based on the principle of drug action. Allopathic drug action it's an opposite to the disease, whereas the homeopathic drug action is based on law of similars. So that way, Ayurveda is also allopathic in its approach. So it doesn't make sense to juxtapose allopathy with Ayurveda. Rather, in anthropology and social science, people have drifted to the term biomedicine, and so it says biomedicine and Ayurveda as we can look at them not necessarily as binaries. In a moment, I will tell you how this idea of biomedicine itself has been looked at in history of medicine, to clarify a little bit on science, non-science questions that we are debating here, and which I think we should go beyond. So firstly, if you see biomedicine its origins and sources of knowledge come from pathological anatomy. If you look at the history, through the dissection of dead bodies, disease, and especially the diseased corpses, and that was the initial source of knowledge. So Michel Foucault said that we are applying knowledge from dead bodies to knowledge of life. That knowledge was translated. So these led to 4 key characteristics of biomedicine. We have biomedical doctors and Ayurvedic doctors here. But this is the way I understand through philosophy of medicine. I await your suggestions later. There are 4 key things I want to flag here. One is because of its moorings in pathological anatomy, the dissection of dead bodies, biomedicine is anatomical and organ-centered approach to disease. It is structural in that it looks not only at the individual organs, but sub-individual levels, cellular levels, in which it goes and looks for the disease. Secondly, this anatomical organ-centered approach is frozen in time. That looks at the problems at a given point in time, and this is applied to living bodies who are live and dynamic in time. But this allows this system to have greater accuracy, precision, because this is derived from its ontological difference, that it looks at organs separated from living bodies or cells which are not in the context. So it has greater accuracy, precision, and they have assigned numerical values to physiological rhythms, what we call in philosophy of science as positivist approach, that assigning numerical values, and so you get a greater precision. And in philosophy of science, the fact that biomedicine evolved from the understanding of diseased dead bodies, it is said that it has no positive definition of health. Health at best is the absence of disease, or it's a numerical norm of having this much of blood pressure or this. There is no positive definition of health. Ayurveda, on the other hand, is, as the name says, it's a science of life. And the knowledge is based on the study, observation of living bodies, and based on the philosophy of what is in the macrocosm and what is in the microcosm. That is the body and the larger environment. They are made of the same kind of material substances. So, and its approach, in contrast to the anatomical approach, its approach is functional, and it seems to think of functions of organ systems. Secondly, it thinks of disease as a process and therefore as something unfolding in time. Thirdly, in contrast to the accuracy and precision of allopathic medicine, Ayurveda seems to deal with qualities of whether it is tridosha or about the properties of medicinal substances. We are talking about qualities of hot, cold, unctuous, dry, etc., which are not yet numerically converted, but which are very meticulously documented. And therefore, they are context specific. There is a typology of patient's body constitution. And therefore, these qualities have to be understood by the learner and the treating physician it requires great skill to be able to correlate these things qualitatively. Then Ayurveda, since its definition derives from a living body and its understanding of disease, it starts with life. and then moves to death, disease and death, it has a positive definition of health. And if you know, the WHO definition of health is derived from the Ayurvedic, it's closest to the Ayurvedic definition of what constitutes health. That is not simply the absence of infirmity, but holistic well-being. One can look up the V.Sujatha's definition of health, but it has a positive definition of health, is the point that I'm trying to make. So now what does this, therefore, I would suggest, rather than looking at Ayurveda and biomedicine as science, non-science, science, superstition, we have to look at them as two epistemes of the body. And again, as to how to understand science here, even within the Western biomedical tradition, there is a critique of positivist medicine. The renowned philosopher Gadamer has criticized the positivist approach to medicine. So you can look at the current lab-centered biomedicine as positivistic or laboratory medicine, and we can think of Ayurveda as a medicine based on life or rationalist medicine. Such themes exist even within the Western debates on medicine. So it's not science versus non-science, but yet many questions remain this is at the level of discourse, at the level of actual practice. The problem is that the definitions of Ayurveda, like Prakriti, medicinal substances, the properties, they have very detailed knowledge of plant, animal, and mineral substances, vast knowledge of their pharmacological action. But for a modern scholar who is entering the institution, there are no manuals as to how this knowledge was gained by the ancient physicians. There is so what happens is, it seems, based on anthropological and other historical research, that this knowledge of how to gain this knowledge was attained through teacher-student relationship. So on hands-on experiences making drugs. So I've heard in interviews many physicians, Vaidyas, saying that they spent 7 years just learning how to make medicines. So those kind of training is that kind of training on understanding the properties of substances, how it works on Prakriti. These things are now not available to a modern scholar in the modern college educated system. And in the past 100 or 200 years, such manuals have not emerged. Textbooks have been written. So there is a gap in that domain. So, and this was acutely felt by no one else than Warrior, the founder of Kottakkal. While he, all due respect to the Gurukula system, Warrior mentioned in his text that the Gurukula system, a very rich learning was possible, but you have to be subject to the tyranny of the Guru. Sometimes they will not teach you. They will, he has explained how difficult it was for him to get answers to certain questions. My own informant, Nagaraja Mudaliyar, the Vaidya, he said that he learned from his father, but it was very difficult. His father used to be very harsh on him. So basically, I'm saying that this was the system in which this was taught, and we currently don't have that kind of manuals to find out how to understand the properties of substances, etc. And we have to use the tools of modern science. So, whereas biomedicine is lab-centered knowledge, it has controlled trials. But the controlled randomized trials are based on the assumption that human bodily processes are identical and that there is no mind. So, whatever trial finds in one part of the world can be applied to all human bodies everywhere in the world. But this aside, biomedical research has provided uniform, replicable numerical parameters. Both the technology and the bureaucratic way in which the knowledge is democratized has led to the uniform spread of knowledge. So whether it's the stethoscope, injections, or the diagnostics tools like ultrasound, whole range of novel diagnostic tools help us visualize the innards of the body. So nowadays, the institutionally qualified Ayurvedic physicians are enamored or are attracted to these tools. They think these are valuable because they can't understand the Tridosha in an abstract sense. As I told you, you don't have the teacher-student relationship. They no longer make the medicines. Many aspects, nuanced, qualitative aspects of Ayurvedic learning have been eschewed from the degree system. It's a very big void there. At least 60 to 80% of the subject in the BAMS Ayush degrees are allopathic subjects. And a lot of studies show that many of these graduates have no idea of herbs. They can't name more than 5 herbs. So they learn Ayurvedic categories and then they prescribed company-made proprietary drugs. So therefore, I want to suggest to these audience that the question is not about science, non-science, etc. This debate has happened for 2 centuries. It is about 2 different sciences of the body, one coming from life, the other coming from the precision that comes from dead body dissection, for a cross-section of the body. So then what are the questions or challenges before Ayurveda, and how do we get around this is what I'll focus on now. So there is, because of these college-educated graduates, there is this tendency for biomedicalization. I think Madhulika has also is the one who foregrounded this term. That increasingly graduates are using allopathic disease categories, and then they are used to all these technologies, but they are neither here or there. They are prescribing tablets. So many anthropologists, initially they were benevolent. They said syncretism. Ayurvedic people themselves call it integration, but in anthropology it is called hybridization, creolization, etc. So the point but for me, that is one of the, to highlight the very specific 2 key problems in my view, is that this biomedicalization has only been increased by the scheme of the government to mainstream Ayush practitioners in public health to deliver allopathic services, about which Dr. Ritu Priya has written. And they are not allowed, generally don't have a scope to practice Ayurveda, nor are Ayush medicines available adequately. Second, and a very big question that confronts us is sustainability. We are all talking about upscaling Ayurveda and making it mainstream it and making it a system. But unlike biomedicine, whose drugs are based on chemicals, Ayurveda, which is based or to some extent on minerals, a large portion on herbs and animal products, how are you going to upscale? Can you replicate the allopathic model of mass production and bureaucracy to Ayurveda? I think it's a fundamental question of sustainability. And the role of market forces in tapping herbal resources for mass manufacture of drugs is a question. See, companies entered Ayurvedic drug manufacture as early as 1890s, but a large portion of Ayurvedic drug prescription continued to use Shastric drugs that were prepared in the Vaidya's household. Until 1995, when I did field work, a lot of anthropological work shows that Vaidyas continued to make these medicines at home and give. Provided to patients. But lately, in the past 10 years or so, that Shastric drugs has reduced. Instead, we are having what is known as proprietary drugs, which are of dubious status. And there is no study comparing the proprietary drugs versus Shastric drugs for their efficacy. What is a proprietary drug? Dr. Kishor Patwardhan also flagged it. It is from the Shastric combination of 10, 20, 30 ingredients, only 1 or 2 is picked up and then converted in a different dosage form. Shastric drugs were in the form of oils, decoctions, paste, all kinds of things. They taste very bitter and sometimes unbearable. Proprietary drugs are sanitized tablet versions. They may have only 1 or 2 ingredients from the Shastric drugs. So and sometimes shastric drugs in the form of a decoction for a fever, for COVID, they all you are required to take it as a decoction because it will also rehydrate your body. But if you take the tablet Coronil, it the medical value of combinatory substances is lost. So Ayurveda has a theory of main medicine and combinatory substances in curing. Now, this proprietary drug violates the Ayurvedic principles of pharmacology in several ways. So there is a need for Ayurvedic physicians to seriously examine whether this dominance of proprietary drugs is going to undermine the efficacy of Ayurveda. The experience of Chinese medicine shows that that is what is happening. So I wish to conclude by grounding what is it as a medical, as a votary of medical pluralism, what is the vision I would have, I'm willing to accept comments on that, is that the foregrounding of Ayurveda in a rubric of medical pluralism means that we are not saying Ayurveda is great and romanticized tradition. No. It's a living and a valuable tradition. But in the rubric of medical pluralism, we need biomedicine, Ayurveda, homeopathy, everything needs to be there. But we have to look at Ayurveda as what kind of alternative to the positivist and lab-centered biomedicine can Ayurveda provide? What is its scope in public health? Currently, Ayurveda is developing more in the private sector, and a lot of these massage, all these things are happening. But there is a shrinking of its role in folk and the popular culture because of the fact also that the current Ayush ministry is neglecting these aspects to some extent, or such folk practitioners, traditional Vaidyas are not being accepted. So there is a scope for public health and there are actual experiments in using these therapies. So I would think that it is possible for Ayurveda to be an alternative, first as a science. It can provide alternative hypotheses. For instance, COVID, we are all thinking of it from the point of view of the invading germ. But Ayurveda and Siddha can give you a theory based on the host. Can you strengthen the host and fight the germ? And such treatment in Tamil Nadu advocated this Kabajura Kudinir and Nilavembu Kudinir from Siddha based on strengthening the host and fighting a whole range of germs. So it is possible that we can have alternate hypothesis, not just of COVID, of anemia also, maternal nutrition. And there are small experiments by which some problems of maternal anemia have been addressed using Ayurveda in public health among the disprivileged sections. So it can provide alternative hypothesis. Second, it is still possible to retrieve alternative mode of production. Through frugal innovation, it is still possible to locate Ayurvedic, the herbs, Ayurvedic herbs need not be standardized throughout the country. Different regions have their own flora and fauna. Those local health traditions could be preserved, and herbal gardens and day-to-day use of herbal medicines could be promoted. The state-based production of simple Ayurvedic, Siddha, Unani medicines should be promoted. And thirdly, alternative lifestyles. If we think that we want to sit and watch Amazon and Netflix and then pop in one Ayurvedic tablet, then that's not the model. We really have to transition to a lifestyle where there is a better balance of the doshas. Ayurveda says watching too much TV or all these things also can affect psychic origin of somatic disorders. All of us know that. So there needs to take some tips for alternative lifestyles. But the current regime, government, doesn't seem to be thinking like that. The way Ayush Ministry has been created, lot of boost has been given, but they are thinking not in terms of sustainability, because in one speech in Nepal, the Prime Minister said, oh, you have the entire Himalayas, you can exploit all the herbs and sell them. So the mindset is one of commodifying the herbs and selling and exporting Ayurveda, or gaining some international honor and prestige are gaining lot of, commodification of herbs, rather than making it available in public health, thinking of making Ayurveda as a cheaper and a more efficacious preventive option also at the public health level. And there is no attention to the principles. Any of these developments should honor the principles and the alternative nature of Ayurveda, even as we incorporate certain new methods. So I will stop here. I do have some observations on caste, but I will respond to it when there's a question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujatha. I think that is somewhere beginning to look like a debate. So we now have issues where you are talking about not doing syncretism or integration, where the system of Ayurveda loses its principles or tends to lose the practice of its principles, but to make them on solid ground and see it as part of what is lived tradition and promote the lived part of it. That's sort of the highlight that I pick up from what you've said. And now move to Madhulika Banerjee. Madhulika.
Thank you, Ritu. And thank you to the Forum for Knowledge and Practice. I mean, this is this is the second time I'm here on this platform, and the last time was a very exciting discussion too. So I'm really looking forward to this, because this is a very important debate. It's been happening for years now, except that it always happens in a kind of niche area of intersection between people who are already interested in the issue. This is one of the few occasions when it is being placed in a larger community of students and researchers and teachers who are interested in the broad questions, but may not actually be vested in the idea of medicine itself. And I think that it's very valuable to have this kind of a conversation. And thank you for initiating this, Shailaja, Manindra, and so on. I was very struck, of course. I mean, old friends and colleagues who spoke before me, both Sujatha and Kishor. I like the way Kishor began by saying, "Who am I?" And I think I will start that way as well, to say that I want to bring in a few completely different kind of positioning on this whole question, and see where it takes the debate. I'm a political scientist, and I'm interested in power fundamentally, and I'm interested in contestations on questions of power. And the one issue on which contestations of power I'm interested in is how knowledge is constituted. And so in the heading, when you say science or superstition, I invite everyone to think about whether there is any element of science in superstition. When someone constitutes something as superstition, do they really understand what the framework of that knowledge is? Whether superstition also constitutes some kind of knowledge, and whether the way science is taught, practiced, and believed in today by millions of people, whether it does not acquire a status of superstition almost amongst many, many people. So I don't think there is a question of science or superstition at all. There is science and superstition. And those who get to define something as superstition and those who get to define something as science are speaking a language of power. And that is what we have to target to begin with. Also, I welcome the fact that both Kishor and Sujatha, clarified on the question of how allopathy, biomedicine, all of these terms are used because this is an extremely vexed field, and at least for many of us in a country like India, at least it is contested territory. And I think that holds some hope for us, because I think many of us are very superstitious also about biomedicine, and why I believe that they are superstitious is, I mean, I know tons of doctors who say, all this mumbo jumbo in homeopathy and Ayurveda, I really don't believe in it. And I only ask them one question: have you seen homeopathic medicine? आंख से देखा है? आयुर्वेदिक दवा क्या होती है आपने कभी आंख से देखा है? And the tragedy is that so many of them have no idea what even the medicine looks like. The fact that Ayurveda has 16 different kinds of formulations at least, in which the medicine is, and every single formulation has such a powerful sort of epistemology and the manner of being prescribed and administered to the patient, and so on and so forth. There's a complex set of understanding about that. So there is a great deal of superstition amongst those who claim to be in the field of science, and they too get to define who are superstitious and what is superstition. And while I have very clear understanding also about oppression by superstitious practices, beliefs, the fact that, there are, and so many of these practices are used actually in power struggles, in power contests. So I do not want to claim at all that there is no such thing as superstition, and that those are not very oppressive instruments of power either. They are, and that's problematic, and that needs to be contested. But to derive a binary between science and superstition, I think is deeply problematic, in itself. And I think that we need to start by understanding that all of these are, these categories are categories of power. And if we can use that understanding in terms of whatever knowledge system we are deploying at any point in time, then we have a much better understanding. We have a better possibility also of a good, healthy debate, I think, and that's why we are here. The second thing that I would like to say is actually linking with what Sujatha talked about, and which is about sustainability. And my interest, I mean, as a political scientist, I'm interested in philosophy of science and the politics of knowledge as it is constituted in terms of the epistemology and so on. But both Kishor and Sujatha have talked very nicely. In such a short time, they were able to refer to many powerful, very well. So I will not go into that at all, but talk about, much more in terms of the political economy of sustainability, which is a very important question today. And, I am going to put out here, because we have very little time, but I will just put out here a fun, basic argument that if we are all wringing our hands and getting very worried about the climate crisis, and we all can see that we need a different way of structuring production, consumption, distribution, and so on, then we have to look at very different forms of knowledge for all of these activities. So production, consumption, distribution, for all of them, we need different kinds of knowledges. And so, for once, I think that when we look at knowledge and all the contestations in knowledges, in the last, and for a long time, perhaps, and certainly in the last 300, 400 years, the journey has been that knowledge is produced in certain kinds of institutional contexts, acquires a certain kind of legitimacy by standardization of some kind, and then goes out through the route of the market, acquires credibility in terms of certain kinds of products in society, and thereby becomes embedded in social practice. So this is the route that knowledge has taken for a long time. I would argue that while this has been the hegemonic route for the last 400 years, all communities that have been outside the pale of this hegemony have been hegemonized, nevertheless survived, thrived, and carried on with a whole range of knowledges that they already always did use. I do no longer call them traditional knowledges because it's a deeply problematic term. Kishor's reference to, how traditional knowledge is constituted something that was written in stone 3,000 years ago, and therefore that cannot be changed or challenged and so on, and absolutely appropriate. So, which is to say that kind of stultified knowledge is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about something that is very dynamic, innovative, and continuously able to negotiate with what is already known and with what is newly known. So any kind of new practice, new technology, to negotiate between already existing knowledges and new technologies is something that people do continuously outside of laboratories on the ground as a means for their everyday production, consumption, distribution systems. And these are some of the most neglected areas of knowledge production that we need to begin to take very, very seriously. And in that sense, I have a somewhat maverick approach now. I really feel that the state and the market are so overrated and so overestimated in terms of what they do and how much, they have the capacity to both, give very valuable give very valuable contribution, but also to ruin societies. I think that our overemphasis on both of these somewhat skews our understanding of the possibilities that lie outside of it. So if we are talking about sustainability, I do believe that institutional organizations of any kind, whether they are the state or the market or the United Nations or anything, they are most unlikely to provide a perspective that is actually going to be valid in the next 50 years or so, that we have to get the climate to get the planet into some kind of order. I do think that the large number of knowledges that exist on the ground which have been actually sustaining communities worldwide, communities for whom the state and the market really don't exist because the state and the market don't bother about them. All my esteemed colleagues on the panel, including Ritu, of course, who are very familiar with all these spaces where the state does not reach, where there is no doctor, where there is no market, people don't die. They continue. And I think that is a very valuable space of knowledge production that we need to understand better. And I think that, there is a need for us to understand that concepts of sustainability, which are actually going to have to foundationally challenge the knowledges that have produced, modern products, modern systems, modern institutions. These will have to be challenged from outside these frames. To think that we are going to tinker with the edges and make do, which is, when we produce a term like green capitalism, or even for that matter, sustainable development, what are we talking about? So I think that this is the frame in which I would like to understand this relationship between Ayurveda and biomedicine. I think that there's an understanding one of the things that I have done, like my colleagues here, spoken to lots and lots of healers on the ground. Now, I do not mean to valorize anyone here. I am just saying that they do have a very different approach to accessing resources, making medicines, and dispensing them, and healing. They have created some kind of a system where nothing exists for them. Not at all. What is more, the new forms of cultivation, which are ruining forests, which are making it more and more difficult for them to access those foundational plant material, which is the basis of their herbal medicine, those are being destroyed. Those resources are being destroyed. Despite which it means that they have to walk a few more kilometers in order to go and find the herbs that they are familiar with and the forests that house them. But they find a way. And I think that it's very important for us to understand how they do it. And this is a very important aspect of knowledge production that we need to look at. And I'm being deliberately provocative, and I think it's very important for us to understand these kinds of a completely different kind of binary. We are talking about people who are producing and living with knowledge as with no power, no capital to their name, as opposed to a powerful state machinery, powerful markets. And we must remember, this is where fundamental political economy statistic is very important. In this country, as Barbara Harris-White says, the Indian economy, i.e., is actually the informal economy. That's also i.e. She says that there is the informal economy is the backbone of this economy. And we really need to understand what knowledge production happens in this informal economy. We need to understand it because it probably offers very different paths to sustainability than those that we have encountered so far. And I would repeat that tinkering with the edges of modern production, whether it's knowledge or anything else, is actually not going to provide us any kind of answer. So this kind of binary is actually very unhelpful to understand anything about what we are to do in the contemporary, to the very, very pressing concerns of the climate crisis and so on, for which we have to find answers. Together with this, then, Sujatha talked about production. I think that one of the most important aspects of Ayurveda, and Kishor Bhai will correct me if I'm wrong. Of course, I've learned almost everything from Vaidyas, and they have been very, very kind, and they have taught me many things. But one of the most interesting aspects of Ayurveda is that because it is ecologically defined, it's a fascinating medical knowledge system for this reason. There is a conceptual commonality. There's a circle of intelligibility as far as the conceptual universe, epistemological universe is concerned. And yet, we have had so much innovation, adaptation, changes, commentary, which are invested in the commentaries that we have on Ayurvedic texts. So it's not, Ayurveda does not stop with Charak Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, or for that matter, the Ashtanga Hridaya. I mean, continuous commentaries continue for a very, very long time. What are these commentaries? I think they are about what I understand them to be adaptations to the local. And where knowledge is adapted to the local, and there is a clear understanding that while there is a conceptual universe that is common, the local is powerful because bodies are different, and the natural habitat is different. And of course, there's a close relationship between the body and the natural habitat, and what is going to suit a particular body type in terms of the food they eat and the kind of work they do and the kind of natural context they live in. And the body that grows in the desert can never be compared to a body that lives in the rainforest. So there is a difference in bodies. And this is something that a lot of contemporary knowledge is coming to accept, and that this needs to be the foundation for medical knowledge. Why is this particular aspect of Ayurveda important? It's important for a large number of reasons, but for a political scientist, what it means is that this looking for standardization of Ayurveda in itself is deeply problematic if we are to define standardization only in terms of the way in which the market understands standardization. Let's have no confusion about this, that the overlap between the scientific understanding of standardization and the industrial understanding of standardization is something that defines modern knowledges. And what Ayurveda, I think to my mind, is actually representative of a whole array of knowledge systems. So I do not chauvinistically mean Ayurveda at all. I mean a whole range of knowledge systems. It's evocative of its innate non-standardizability, which does not mean lack of quality. So I've talked about this and I've written about this quite a lot, but the fact that standardization in itself. So, Kishor, I have a disagreement with you on this, that I do not think, and I was confused actually, because you said initially that it's science as a universal method, perspective. And then you said in the end that, you are challenging this whole notion of the universal, did I get it right? I'm not sure whether I noted it, but the fact that, scientific method and its universal applicability is something that needs to be questioned. I think that there is a very important issue here, which needs to be challenged epistemologically. And that challenge is so powerful because it challenges the entire structure of uniformity, which is absolutely germane to the idea of the nation state, to the idea of the market, and to the idea of international trade, the construction of international categories, everything. Because we are looking at, the way in which all of these things are defined, the hegemonic definition of standardization is coterminous on every single in every single field. So politics, economy, society, all of these are looking for standardization. And all of these knowledges rebel against standardization because they believe that being rooted ecologically is foundational to their perspectives. So we have to think of, and it's now clear. Now we put it very cleverly in languages of global, local, etc., etc. I mean, you need to produce locally, consume locally, etc. वो सब बहुत बढ़िया बातें हैं, लेकिन बात ये है ना कि local, जब तक आप local कर रहे हैं, आप aspire कर रहे हैं, लेकिन global के लिए. And unless you aspire that your niche local product should be available globally at a very big price. I mean, that is the aspiration of the local. So, which is something deeply problematic. There's a lot that can be said on this, and I would love to, discuss this more at some other time. But these are, so I see a fundamental disconnect between the way in which, if we are to understand this as a viable medical knowledge. See, you want to make the medical knowledge acceptable in the current market as it is, well, that's what they've been doing for 100 years. And that's why we have the products like Himalaya Drug Company. You can pop turmeric and tulsi pills. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. But that's the market. That's the one that works. And I've written about that. So that's one. And finally, I would just like to say that when we are talking about these knowledges in terms of the value of the contemporary, I think that starting from the bottom up, disregarding this kind of frame where all knowledge has to come from the university, from the laboratory, from the government, from institutions of eminence, and you and I sitting in these such institutions have the courage to say that the knowledge production that is happening elsewhere, let's try and see what we can do with it. Because the future of the planet is not based on these petty egos of institutions. It's a much bigger question than that. And I think it's time that we began to make ourselves eligible to answer these questions. I think that's far more important and exciting. And I think, that's where we need to begin the debate. Thank you, Ritu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Madhulika. that's really been three in a string, which has taken the issues from step to step to step. And I'm sure everybody listening in can see the way it's moved. I would, Shailja, how would you like it? Should we open it to questions first?
Ma'am, as you prefer, if any of the speakers want to interact.
Are there any questions in the chat? Have you looked?
Yes, I just saw a comment by somebody, Suparna HG, that qualification knowledge gives us a part to define, but we haven't had any question for now. But if any speaker wants to interact with each other based on their
yeah, I mean, that comment itself,
yeah.
the panel, I'm sure, would like to take up.
So shall we take questions from the audience first?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, that was sort of from the audience that has in chat. Yeah, that's why I asked if there's anything in the chat. So that is one comment, which is saying that
may I begin?
Yeah, Pushpriya has raised her hand.
And yeah, so after Manindra, then the next whoever you said the hand, I didn't get the name. Yeah.
Thank you, Madhulika and Dr. Patwardhan and Sujatha. I think one of the reasons why we thought of having this debate is that there's a bombardment of various kinds of videos on the social media, and so uninformed and ill-informed and just kind of projecting useless arguments. I hope this video will be available and people may go deeper into the issues. Let me begin with a philosophical issue, which I think all three of them have raised, and the issue of philosophy of science. There are three positions I can see. One position is that there has to be universal science. Other position is that there are multiple plurality of sciences and let them remain like that. And third position is that there's a local knowledge production and there's no need to even think of having any kind of dialogue between epistemologies, and there are two different epistemologies and the local should also be celebrated. We don't want to call it local knowledge system or traditional knowledge system, which I think is perfectly well. But the point is that, if, and let me also say this in the beginning itself, that as it used to happen earlier, even today, the major philosophical debate or resolution of major debates would happen in the realm of medicine. But that is where everything is at stake, I think. We have to really have a notion of the body-mind relationship, and so many other things. So a lot of debates going on in the realm of philosophy and philosophy of science, and not only have deep implications for this realm, but also the debate taking in this realm has deep implications for other realms, so pure philosophical realms. So I want to talk at that level to begin with. I think Dr. Patwardhan, would you like to consider the new debates in philosophy of science, where there's a lot of questioning about the Newtonian frame of epistemology, where, there are three layers of debate. One is saying that regularity is a necessary and sufficient condition for being science. That is a Newtonian frame. Popperian frame says regularity is necessary but not a sufficient condition for being science. And third is critical realism, which says regularity is neither necessary nor sufficient condition for being science. So there are three different models of being of science also. So if we take that, the third model, which is most recent, which has come out after the debates that has been raised by philosophers on chaos theory and some quantum and chaos theory. So if we consider that, then probably something that you are looking for, the universal knowledge or universal epistemology, the goalpost will change. The universal itself will change. And in that, do you think there is a possibility of initiating a new dialogue where Dr. Madhulika and Dr. Sujatha might agree, is that there is no definite universal, the universal itself is always emerging, and the relation between part and the whole, or universal and the local, should be that the universal is constantly transforming with the help of the local. So whereas I agree with you about need of universal frame of science, I would not agree with a fixed universal that is given by the modern science, by the Newtonian science. If we open that universal and allow that emergentist model to work, which has very well been discussed by somebody called David Bohm, a quantum physicist, in his book called Wholeness and Implicate Order, that how this emergentist model might work. That probably initiate a process of dialogue between different knowledge traditions. I think if there is no dialogue, then at a popular level, there is a lot of confusion. I wouldn't agree that this should be integrated, one nation, one medicine system, or one knowledge system might be a problematic, because then the question will be whose framework is being taken as universal within which the other is adjusting. Because as I would agree with Sujatha, there are two different frameworks. And in fact, the Ayurvedic medicine framework raises certain solid philosophical questions about the body-mind relationship, about which the entire world is debating now, that Cartesian dualism that made biology possible in the West, or that is at the foundation of the modern medicine, as Sujatha is saying that it's worked on the dead body. That framework itself is in crisis. So probably that universal framework of medicine itself needs some transformation. That is one. Second, that Madhulika, I would like to know if suppose I would agree with you in two of the villages where I'm working. One is a highly philosophical discourse, that is a Nyaya tradition in Mithila, and other is a Tantric tradition in Mayong. In both the places, they have been surviving their own philosophical knowledge. And not only that, their everyday life is governed around that fairly well. But when it comes to contradiction with the modern state, then they don't know how to handle it. Like in Mayong, I was told by the police officer that large number of the texts were burnt, and they blamed that as black magic. Now Mayong people have become a little smarter. They call themselves as white magic tradition. White magic tradition. White magic tradition is a healing tradition, and a lot of healing things are going on there. So how do we handle that situation? Well, the state is not only penetrating, but also penetrating with a certain framework of knowledge, and every other thing is marginalized. Along with that, there are also practices which could be considered as inhuman practices. Like in Mayong itself, people say, I don't know, I'm not sure of it, but maybe it's just a myth created around that there was a tradition of human sacrifice. So is that the kind of thing that one can go along with? So that is another problem. And third thing is that the ethics of medicine. I think this non-modern traditions, if I don't want to call it traditional traditions, non-modern traditions had very strong ethics attached to it. I have a friend who is an anthropologist, whose father is a tribal from Jharkhand. His father has access to very interesting knowledge about medicine. And father is not ready to deliver it to son. So the son kept struggling. Then son asked him finally, why do you want not to give me? He said that you don't have an ethics. You will start selling it off. Or my favorite story from Premchand, mantra. So this ethics is attached with knowledge system, and the modern knowledge system is guided by market and state, as you are saying, power relationship. So how do we then survive with the traditional ethics if due to that ethics, the knowledge is not delivered to the new generation? How do you manage that? Large number of traditional knowledge is dying. For one, this reason that they are not ready to deliver it to the new generation. How do you manage that? Thank you. Maybe some other question later on, but these one.
Yeah, Manindra, that sets a whole set of issues on the table. Any other questions, or shall we start on that discussion?
I'm
Pushya had asked, raised her hand.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much to the speakers and to the forum. I have 2 questions for Dr. Kishor. And the first deals with his concluding position favoring the integration of allopathy or biomedicine with Ayurveda. Speaking to, I think, what we have just heard about the unequal power dynamics involved in institutionalized knowledge production, and the so-called, and those that exist so-called outside of the system, we are, in a sense, when we speak of allopathy and Ayurveda, I think, referring to 2 very different epistemologies of knowledge, philosophies, and also notions of healing, ecospaces, as well as notions of the body. So while integration certainly sounds desirable, my question is whether it is in practice desirable, or whether it would also include or involve destroying epistemological boundaries that make Ayurveda and traditional healing systems, I think, give them a very unique place today. And I also ask whether it would not be better to hold on to what he referred to in the conclusion as a parallel coexistence, which I would like to think of as a coexistent mosaic of systems that are not homogenized, but are coexistent. So this is my first question. And the second is, he had also mentioned in his presentation that postmodern dialogue venerates local health traditions. And I'd just like to know whether he is using Ayurveda and local health traditions synonymously there. Thank you.
Maybe Patwardhan, would you want to respond to both Manindra and...
Sure.
Ritu, I just wanted to come in for a second.
Yeah.
Kishor, I'm very sorry, but can I, since I have to leave, do you mind if I just quickly respond to the couple of things that...
Fine, yeah, it is fine, yeah.
That Manindra raised. I'm very sorry I have to do this. I don't normally do this, but today is
go ahead.
Hey, a couple of things that Manindra said. One is about the conflict with the state and the kind of issues that come up with it. And the second is about, the ethics of knowledge traditions. These 2 things I just want to quickly respond to. See, with the conflict of the state, there's no question that in all contexts, this is something that they need to, we need to find ways of negotiating with the state. And that will remain. I do not have a response to that, a response in the sense that I don't know what is being can be. I wouldn't prescribe anything, because I think that everywhere the negotiation is of a completely different order. And the parameters are different, the contexts are different. And I think people find very unique ways of negotiating with the state. I mean, I can just juxtapose this with a kind of conflict that, let's say, the community that worships the Khejri tree, the Bishnois. The Bishnois and the way in which they have negotiated with the state on the protection of the Khejri tree and the kinds of issues that come up around it, I think that while the state intervenes with a standardized set of laws and rules, the response to the state comes from the place of the understanding of both legality and justice that communities have, which comes from their knowledges about themselves, about their relationship with nature, their relationships with each other, and the kind of knowledge about the commons, knowledge about everything that they have, which they bring to the table when they negotiate with the state. And I think that this is something that political scientists, for instance, have no understanding of common law, of customary law, which is such an important realm that constitutes the culture of people who negotiate with the modern state. And, we only have learned how to dismiss something like the carp because the carp is associated with something so negative as honor killings. And that should be condemned, no question about it. And this is where it brings me to the second point. I'll just come to that. But, the carp is also the traditional institution that has been responsible for carrying the customary laws that protect environments, protect the natural habitat, protect the relationship between people about the natural habitat for centuries. So the carp is actually a broad category of political institution that actually carries these kinds of customary laws which preserve. So when we say that Adivasis have been able to preserve the forests which they have lived on, it comes from this kind of a complex set of institutions and laws which we really need to make it our business to find out. Brings me to the second aspect though, which is that I think one of the most important issues of engaging with knowledges and practices on the ground is about bringing a modern criticality to them. I think that, for instance, exactly the point that you are saying, I would juxtapose with the question, with the issue that Sujatha flagged, which was about the way in which knowledge is passed from one generation to the next, invariably called father to son. That itself is very problematic. And the deeply gendered nature of knowledge production and knowledge, dissemination, that, but also the extremely harsh and very objectionable kind of structures in which knowledge productions. And that when you bring up your child in a certain context of knowledge production, and you can't trust that child, to carry your knowledge, there is some, we are all parents now. We need to understand that there's something deeply problematic about the way in which we have constituted that knowledge and enabled the next generation to negotiate that knowledge with the larger changes in the cultural, political, economic context in which they find themselves. So the knowledge production and how it goes forward has to see itself as something that that contests with these kinds of structures. That has to be part of the deal. And now, all kinds of knowledges, for instance, that, every single, so now after Birju Maharaj has passed away, and this whole, realm of how knowledge is disseminated in the classical tradition, musical tradition, and the dance tradition. I am one of the, I love Hindustani classical and dance, which is something I understand and appreciate deeply. And I find it deeply problematic that there are so many oppressive dimensions, and we understand them as oppressive, and they have to be contested. And I cannot buy the fact कि थप्पड़ मार के सिखा सकते हो, ऐसे हमने सीखा और हजारों जनरेशन से हमने इसको कैरी किया तो यही सबसे अच्छा है. I'm sorry, but my modern notion of politics pushes me to contest that, and I will. So I think that this negotiation is a difficult one, and if we truly believe in democracy, then these are the realms in which we have to. So I would not, while I would deeply respect your friend's father for his, for his protection of that ethical part, but I think I would really question him to say, how are we constituting this knowledge, and what does it mean? And therefore, it will have to go into the whole question of commercialization, what it means, why it should be challenged, and the parameters of commercialization, which all of us have referred to. I have written about it quite a lot. So, and the standardization according to, the parameters of modern medicine, etc. All of these issues would come in, but we have to deal with them at some level. I will stop there. Sorry, that was too long, perhaps. Thank you, Ritu.
Thank you, Madhulika. And so Professor Patwardhan.
Yeah, sure. So there were a few points that I took down. I should confess that my area of expertise is limited to Ayurveda and a bit of modern science, and rather I am not acquainted with the philosophy of science, especially in connection to the sociological aspects and the recent advances in the definitions of the framework of sciences. So I'm really sorry I'm unable to answer to this question. But at the same time, I would like to also say that what I spoke of was about scientific method. So scientific method is universal. This is what I have been trying to argue, that there cannot be two scientific methods. So scientific method always follows a particular pattern and specific stages, especially when it comes to medical sciences. Maybe it might differ in some other sciences, but in medical sciences, which has to deal with the interventions and the response you get in human bodies. So this has to have a reproducibility. So reproducibility happens to be one of the important parameters that sets what is the question, or rather answer to the question as to what is science. So for medical scientists, it is always the reproducibility. If it is not reproducible, there has to be a suspicion and a skepticism. For example, Nadi, we always, I mean, many of us, we have been arguing that yes, epistemologically Ayurveda is different and modern science is different. But when it comes to certain practices like Nadi, for example, there are so many demonstrated papers which say that observation of Nadi among Vaidyas, from one Vaidya to another Vaidya, inter-rater variability. There is too huge variability. Even the body type identification, there are too huge wide variabilities. So it is not as simple. I mean, it is not as fanciful as it looks like. Actually, it is. I mean, the practitioners, we know the difficulties, because the textbooks, they have got some small indications, but when it comes to practicing, it is really, really challenging. So unless we don't subject these issues to be examined and researched, I think it is going to drain a lot of energy and also the resources, simply transmitting what we are not really clear about ourselves. So this is one point that I would like to make out. And second thing is about the science as such. And the implementation of science. So these are two different aspects. For example, the debates on climate change. So often we say that yes, science has ruined the planet, but no, science has not ruined the planet. So the implementation or policymakers, they have ruined. I mean, they have improperly applied the science without a discretion, and that has led to disasters. So science is different, and how do we apply it is different. This is the second point. Third point is about the local health tradition that I was referring to, was from Alan Sokal's paper. He refers to even Ayurveda and other several examples he quotes, even the astrology or Vastu. These are the examples that he takes up, and he says that while projecting them as though they are epistemologically different and they are the science themselves, while doing so, what do the postmodernists do is that they ignore or they discredit the science as such. So this is what he argues. So it was not my opinion as such. And one more point that I would like to share over here is that regarding the parallel and this integration, yes, this is a contentious issue. I agree that we may not come to a conclusion in a matter of few minutes or of debate of this kind, of course. But the point I would like to make is that Ayurveda physicians, if they are not given exposure to current medical sciences, especially maybe the basic sciences, maybe genetics, maybe molecular biology, if these subjects are not introduced into Ayurvedic curriculum, then how do you expect Ayurvedic research to happen? And someone who doesn't know what is Ayurveda, how do you expect him to do research in Ayurveda? So the question comes when the research is imposed on Ayurveda. So we are asked to show that Ayurveda works, and we don't know how. I mean, what is the method of showing that Ayurveda works? I mean, this is the problem at the level of education. So our education system is very, very poor, and we don't teach our students the scientific temperament. This is what I was trying to emphasize. So if a common degree of maybe UG, undergraduate level, comes into place, and then they are offered to do research in maybe Ayurveda, maybe Siddha during their postgraduate levels, at least they would be having some basic level of understanding of human body and how the medical research works. So this was what I had in my mind. Yeah, thank you.
May I just try to?
Yes, sir.
Doctor, how will you then reconcile this idea that Dr. Sujatha is suggesting, that one is doing research on the dead body, other is doing research on the living body? So they are so different. So are you going to ask somebody who is doing research on the dead body to then get into the other knowledge, or are you going to do otherwise? So I think these two epistemologies, how do they negotiate? That is also a very difficult thing.
Absolutely. But what I think is this kind of categorization or maybe binary understanding is problematic. Modern science is doing, working on human living bodies also. It is not working on dead bodies. Okay, maybe historically it was evolved, but even in Sushruta Samhita, there is a reference to the dissections of dead bodies. So, but the tools that they had access to, so whatever has documented in Ayurveda was based on the tools that they had access to. But now we have got much more advanced tools, and we must make use of, to achieve the same goal. So actually there is no huge dichotomy as it is made to be seen. This is what I wanted to say. Of course there could be dichotomy, but this dichotomy is not so huge that there cannot be a congruence.
Can I come in here?
Yes, yes, Sujatha, please.
So Sujatha, can I just make one small comment, which will be related to what you were going to ask, I guess. I guess. Then how do you look at this question that Dr. Sujatha is raising about the consciousness, mind-body thing? Because the modern medicine treats body not as, or mind as embedded in body, or body as embedded in mind. It is a duality. How will you reconcile that? Maybe Dr. Sujatha can give some more insight on this. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, given the short, since we are dealing with very big issues, so sometimes we may not be able to convey what we intended. I am not, when I spoke about the knowledge coming from dead bodies and knowledge coming from living bodies, I'm presenting how these medicines arrive at what they arrive from different vantage points. And I also said it is at the level of discussion. But in actual practice today, the way physicians practice, I do think there are genuine problems which Dr. Kishor Patwardhan foregrounded. But still, when I say that something has to be an alternative, the reason that they should not be blended or completely, the idea that it should be one health system and they should be completely brought together is that the whole idea of pluralism is not any one medical system can address everything. Despite the power of science and the lobby throughout the world, medical pluralism is practiced. It's even in the UK, everywhere, whatever scientific lobby is saying, traditional, all other, their own alternative medicines, traditional medicines, yoga is a big hit. So which shows that the kind of ailments we face requires pluralistic approach. And people, if not governments and if not science, people are seeking that. My own fieldwork in Europe, where people, there is a very big Ayurvedic community. European practitioners of Ayurveda are there. I mean, one can talk about that. So these things are gaining ground because there is a value for this kind of treatment. And our own country, we will face this situation when you feel you are saturated with chemicals and you need other ways of dealing with the body. Since this knowledge is available in these parts of the world, whether it's Chinese medicine or Mayan medicine, there is a certain need to keep up its uniqueness into some respects, to some extent, while you utilize the tools of modern science. This is my position. I'm not saying keep them apart, they can't mingle and all. At the practical level, a lot of interaction and innovation has happened. And many integrative approaches have emerged, but I don't think they can be collapsed together into one system. They should. My vision is that their uniqueness should be preserved. That only then you'll have alternatives. Otherwise, you will have a world of monolithic, more homogeneous world. These knowledges are there, so they have to be preserved. Now, so there are ways how, coming down to actualities, I agree with Dr. Kishor Patwardhan that it's a genuine problem that this tridosha, the body types, different physicians arrive at different diagnosis of the same person. Dr. Dwarkanath, he tried to see whether the Vata, Pitta, Kapha type could be statistically understood. Means every patient coming to a hospital, you do a question answer and try. It was very difficult to evolve a standard protocol. And here I disagree a bit with Madhulika in the sense that we can't take the romantic position, let everything be chaotic, anarchic and all. A treating physician needs certain background. Since the traditional ways of learning are lost and they are learning from college, they do need the tools of modern medicine. But the point in which I differ is that these tools of whether X-rays, all the visualizing tools, the technologies and methods of positivism, to some extent, to learn more about the dosha or these Ayurvedic categories, they are valuable. But if we shift completely to the vocabulary, where do you draw the line? That is my question. Where people have drawn the line. And as a sociologist, I will go and interview different Vaidyas and try to see where they have drawn the line. And I also want to give you anecdotes. I don't think the situation is as difficult as Dr. Patwardhan is making out. There are examples where Ayurvedic physicians who learned in colleges, they try and learn Nadi through personal apprenticeship with Vaidyas. The Siddha Vaidyas that I am interviewing in Tamil Nadu, they are all coming from urban backgrounds. They don't know any herb. They are reluctantly joining the Siddha course. After 1 or 2 years, they are beginning to like it. And then there is a person there, Michael or somebody who lives in interior Tamil Nadu. They go and spend time with him. He takes them on herbal walks. He teaches them Nadi. And then they come back. And now they are all doing the 5-year course. Plus they do an unofficial internship and that is how they have revived Varma Sikitsha and all that. So society and when people get interested, they find ways and solutions which at the intellectual debate level we can't think of. So second example I want to give you is again of German Ayurvedic community. I wanted to share a picture. I think I won't be able to do it. That is, I found the German Ayurveda Association, how they learned Ayurveda. They are allopathic doctors and they were trying to learn Nadi and they were doing it in small groups or 5 or 6 people each under a Vaidya. They would record, test their Nadi, then take notes. So they were following a homeopathic method of talking about symptoms, recording, and trying to compare notes and trying to understand the Nadi. And in a couple of workshops, they did arrive at a consensus. So they are allopathic doctors interested in Ayurveda, and the German Ayurvedic Association is now growing to be one of the most powerful, and they learn through small workshops where Vaidyas visit them. And so they think they can revive Nadi through this kind of learning. So many such experiments exist. And as a sociologist, I'm interested in documenting these experiments where these systems interface, how they understand, how they learn, and so on. So lastly, with regard to this was a response to Madhulika that, all these local knowledges should be left where there are. I just returned from Madhya Pradesh. I did see that the Bhagats are doing great work with herbs, but they also have a problem. They can't diagnose basic things like leprosy or TB. A lot of patients are dying because such diagnosis is not happening at the right time, and they don't get access to treatment. So we also have to reassess the current status of knowledge and gaps, and they have to be linked with the healthcare system. Some basic information and knowledge renewal and refreshment will be needed. I'll stop here. There's a couple of questions there.
Yeah, Shailja, are there any more questions coming?
There's something
Yes,
on the group.
yes, ma'am. Anuradha has raised her hand for some time. So, ma'am, would you like to ask your question? And then we can read out from the comment section once Anuradha has asked her question.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Thank you so much for this absolutely rich discussion. Actually, perhaps I should start with Madhulika. The problem, as I see it, is that the nexus is not just between the state and the market, but as Sujatha pointed out, it is the expert or the scientist or the epistemology aspect of it. So there is the nexus is between what we believe to be science. So the scientist actually leads the expert opinion when the state asks for a policy statement on this. So really the onus is on the university to, as it were, create the grounds for seeing the fundamental epistemological differences between Ayurveda and so then so that is one problem, that the nexus is of the expert, the state, and the market, and one plays into the other, and we should not forget that that aspect, because I think ultimately the king, the power in this matter stands with the person who is in control of the epistemology. Then the other aspect was a response to Manindra's question of the ethics of this demand that the teacher has with the student. But if I can reformulate that question in terms of the very problem of translation, if we don't have clarity on the epistemological difference, then I find that as a philosopher, I have seen that many of the Sanskrit texts have been translated out of recognition, where the standardization has taken place just in terms of, the epistemology has just shifted from one. So the very vocabulary has been lost for having that differentiation between one and the other. And therefore, I think, I think this ethics is the demand for ethics is the explicit reason for the implicit demand that epistemology has, or a different epistemology has, of the relationship between the subject and the object, or what Manindra was talking about, of the problem of the mind and the and the body relationship, because I suppose that is the implicit reason for that demand that the teacher has is an epistemological one. I would want to suggest, maybe Sujatha could respond to that. Yeah, and the third was a practical question, which again, Dr. Patwardhan and Sujatha, and perhaps even, which is the access to treatment. I think in the modern lifestyle, to have a doctor ready at hand, and I have found every time that with respect to Ayurvedic practitioners, that access to treatment is that immediate access in an emergency, or is not available. So of course that can be dealt with in terms of having hospitals, Ayurvedic hospitals or things like that, but perhaps it's not the same as getting to this is just a sort of problem that I've always had to grapple with. Yeah, thank you.
There are questions in the chat box. Should we read that out?
Please, yeah. Can you just read that out?
Yes. This is by Rashi. If she's also here, if she wants to ask, otherwise I can read it out. Rashi, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. Go ahead, Rashi.
We can't hear you if you're trying to speak, Rashi. Or I'll read the question out then in case I miss. So according to her question is, modern medical science works to create/facilitate a modern individual who has an existence embedded in the interplay of market and state power. Can it then be said the Ayurvedic stance to such a modern existence and its conception of well-being is not very clear at the moment? And also, Pushpa had a question again, but if she would like to ask, or I can read it out. Should I read it out?
We can take one question after the other, maybe.
Okay.
If Dr. Kishor Patwardhan or Dr. Ritu Priya want to answer this question, or I could.
Why don't you go ahead, Sujatha?
Yeah. No, Rashi, it is not that the point is not that Ayurveda is not suitable to the modern individual. I just told you that in Europe and the US, following the heels of yoga, Ayurveda is also becoming very much a popular thing. And they are so, and even here, that it is being used in that way if you're talking about modern lifestyle, but it is not so it's not that it's not adaptable. The point is, but if you want it to be handed over to you like biomedicine in the form of easy capsules and injections, that's not possible. It does demand a certain lifestyle change, which any system of medicine will demand of you. It's so everything, but Ayurveda gives a significant importance to lifestyle and change in diet, doesn't treat only through medicines. So if you are having certain chronic problems, you can't only resolve through surgery, etc. You can make lifestyle, those kind of some amount of alternative lifestyles might be desirable. The world is moving towards that. So it is not non-modern or traditional in that respect, but we should be willing to take bitter substances, the bad tasty things that whose taste you are not familiar with, not only sweet, sour, or cheesy substances. Those kind of compromises, those kind of treatments should be accepted by us. That's what I meant when I said alternative lifestyles, but it is very well suitable to other to our current lifestyle. I don't know whether I answered. Any you want to add?
not to this particular question, but I would like to respond to a couple of points that were raised during the debate. One is about people opting Ayurveda. So people are opting Ayurveda. There is no doubt in it. And Ayurveda is also offering definitely some relief. But when it comes to evidence, there is no evidence. There's no sufficient evidence. And people coming to Ayurvedic hospitals, flocking into hospitals, too many numbers of patients doesn't make it a reliable evidence. This is what I'm concerned about. So without producing evidence, we cannot say that Ayurveda really works, and we need to have evidence. And of course, maybe I agree that this double-blind randomized control trial may not be suitable option for Ayurveda to be evaluated. Maybe pharmacoepidemiological approaches, or maybe this observational studies, long-term observations. For example, even the link between lung cancer and smoking was established through a longitudinal study, which went on for more than 40 years. So I think this is the thing that we should consider taking up so that we can produce evidence. Otherwise, I am there in Ayurvedic field since about 25 years or 30 years. And I have been observing, but so far there is no good evidence to say that Ayurveda really works in any condition, to be very, very frank. I mean, as far as the literature goes, maybe I know that, yes, my medicine works in particular condition, but there is no convincing evidence as of now. So this is where the things get trickier. And for example, Nadi, as Dr. Sujatha said, yes, Nadi, standardization of Nadi or learning Nadi may not be difficult, but I would go one step ahead. I'm skeptical, and I would like to know whether all of them diagnose the same patient in a same manner. If all the records, or all the results of Nadi will match or not. There are sufficient methods that have been evolved to test this. For example, this Alan Sokal quotes an example of this nursing. In nursing, there was a therapy called therapeutic touch. It was there in textbooks. It came into practice, and there were so many theses written, so many papers published. Everything happened. But one fine morning, a 9-year-old child, girl, she watched on television saying that what is this nonsense going on? And then she tried a single blind procedure to evaluate whether this therapeutic touch is real or not. It was hypothesized, it was proposed that therapeutic touch is something where the nurses would bring their hands nearer to the patient, and they would feel the energy fields of the patient, and they would manipulate it. And it went on for so many decades. And then she demonstrated that, yes, it is completely hoax. And she happens to be the first youngest authors to have published in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association. You can find that paper even today. So see, this is the thing, this is the extent of skepticism that we need to imbibe in our students. This is what is lacking in Ayurveda. And this is what I was highlighting. I think I have now made my point clear.
Yes. Chairperson, would you please allow me to interrupt?
Okay, because now I find I let you do that, but I just want to say that now I'm going to take my prerogative after you have made your point, because we are at 7:53, I see in the clock. And
thank you so much for
I do want to come in also as somebody who is a graduate in modern medicine and have my bit of say. So go ahead. Yeah.
Ma'am, my question, which I had also pointed in the chat box, was actually more about, are the concerns of the modern individual not so much taken account within the Ayurvedic stance at this moment? Because Ayurveda, as has been pointed out previously, works on a very different kind of epistemology. When the epistemology is different, when the subject and object becomes different, our concerns become very different. And modern medical science has a own agenda of facilitating a kind of individual who is able to contribute to an interplay of state and market. Now, within that dynamic, how would we place Ayurveda's stance? Because their concerns, the modern individual's concerns, are very different. So could it be said that, yes, it might be becoming popular in many regions, but is it really catering to the concern? What if the concerns are different in the times of Ayurveda and in modern times? That is my question. So just to clarify, and I seek your response. Thank you.
Okay, Rashid. Yeah.
Should I respond to this?
Yes, please.
I have made my point very clear. These are the kind of questions that we need to take up, and we need answers. And nobody is asking these questions. This is the problem within the Ayurvedic community also. We are not asking the questions whether we are really catering to the needs of the society. We don't know. And this has become a mess. To be very frank. Yeah.
Okay, I think at that point, yes, Shailja, did you put up your hand?
Yeah, ma'am. There was a question by Pushya, but should we take that just the last question, and then ma'am?
Okay, then we can take that as the last, if you like, and then
because she just her question is, but how then are Ayurvedic students supposed to reconcile reductionist perceptions of the body and more abstract or holistic perceptions of the same body as constituted of, let's say it's Trishodas, if there's such an integration of the syllabi, does or / would this not contribute to cognitive dissonance at many levels?
No, not at all. Not at all. Basically, the thing is that right now, the status of Ayurvedic student is extreme state of cognitive dissonance, where we teach too many things without any integration. But actually, this reductionism, again, this has become a fancy word. There are two types of reductionism. One is ontological reductionism, and second one is methodological reductionism. Methodological reductionism is very, very essential. Without that, you cannot diagnose a disease. But ontological reductionism is dangerous. You cannot say that entire body is made up of atoms, so let me treat an atom. No, that is not possible. Or entire body is made up of cells, so why don't we treat cells? No, that is not how it works. But when it comes to methodological reductionism, the diagnosis part is very essential, and that has to be incorporated in Ayurveda. So this reductionism is a word that has been highly misused. Holism and this reductionism, without understanding the actual meaning of these terms, these are being misused. This is what my concern is.
Okay, I think with that really opens out to what I was wanting to say, and then bring this today's discussion to a close, because we all have to go for our dinner and so on. What I want to pick up from is Kishor Patwardhan's understand the dilemma of the Ayurveda graduate. And that's what was placed last. And to me, what came through in the discussion today and comes to me repeatedly as the MBBS graduate had come into public health and studied the social sciences and philosophy and so on, that these are things that we're completely devoid of, whether it is modern graduate or it is the Ayurveda graduate. We don't have exposure to the kind of debate we've had today, or the kind of things that Sujatha and Madhulika had to say. If those are not there, there cannot be critical thinking and scientific thinking by the doctors or the Veds that we are producing. And therefore, that to me is one central submission that comes to me through the discussion today. But leaving that on one side for the moment, I do want to say that across the three speakers, what we saw was the commonality saying the use of all knowledges for a public health priority in the country and for the poor. That went across all three. The approach to it was different as Dr. Manindra Thakur pointed out, that how do you bring all knowledges together is where the contestation is really. And that's where the understanding of the philosophy and the whole issue of power play. Unless we took those into account, for example, Patwardhan, I would say that you're saying that bringing them together on an even playing field. Will Ayurveda and modern medicine in the way history has evolved over the last 400 and therefore where we are today, will Ayurveda get a level playing field? If it does not, it's a good desire to say they must integrate on an equal footing. But they cannot do it. And we concede by giving into methodologies? But I would go along with you as an insider to modern medicine as well, that medicine itself has to concede to uncertainty. So saying that the nadi is going to be seen differently by different Veds, and therefore we need a standardization, may not be the way to go. In fact, modern medicine is beginning to learn that you can't do standardization, right? And therefore coming to personalized medicine and so on. The fact that it's moving away from the Descartian divide to systems biology and to looking at the microbiome and coming very close to Ayurveda to saying the microbiome in our intestines is what affects the way our brain functions, is something which is very different from the kind of conventional biomedicine that I, for example, studied 40 years ago. So one can see points where there is synergy happening from both sides. And therefore, the second submission I would make is that in the present times, while the roots are epistemologically different, because of historical trends, the two lineages have two different epistemologies within them. Ayurveda today is both getting so standardized and, what Sujatha and Madhulika said about pharmaceuticalized, commercialized, standardized, that it's losing its roots and moving into the modern framing. While the modern is tending to move away from that, while the political economy of the medical industrial complex is keeping it completely tied down to that reductionist mode. But that's not all of modern medical science or modern public health. And it is these marginal streams within the modern and the principle-based streams within the holistic sciences like Ayurveda, which need to come together. While the pharmaceuticalized Ayurveda and the conventional dominant medical practice will go together. They already have. Ayurveda's pharmaceuticalization is an example of that. And the way the ministry today, what you were critiquing as what the ministry is doing, is exactly that. It's going in the way that it has seen science and medicine go in the last 100 and 200 years at least. So it's following in that vein with that understanding. So to me, it's a question of this dialogue with the communities and what would therefore then be a bottom-up democratic pluralism, what Madhulika talked about, and I've earlier written about undemocratic pluralism. Pluralism per se we see as positive, and therefore it tends to sort of get linked with democratization. But if that pluralism can be very undemocratic, in the way we in India, for example, have the fact that we've had 8 systems recognized was a recognized pluralism, but we gave them such short shrift to Ayurveda and Unani and Siddha and so on, was an undemocratic pluralism. But the other undemocratic pluralism is between the standardized Ayurveda and Unani and Siddha and the practice of it by communities and by healers in communities. That is another form of undemocratization within the plural. So how do we do this dialogue with communities? And what Dr. Manindra Thakur was saying about the universal science and yet it constantly being in dialogue with these bottom-up processes. So how do we bring this formal standardization, which is a need for mass provision of healthcare? Right. Now, the point again is differentiating between that. Do we think that mass provisioning is desirable? I would think it's one of the gains of the 20th century that we have that kind of democratization of development. At the same time, it brings all these negatives, including an ecological degradation and the social inequalities that it does create, and the loss of holism in our knowledge systems. So how do we, recognizing this, try to see that there is this constant dialogue seems to be the one. Now, therefore, how do we have develop ecosystems of dialogue? Because dialogue won't just happen on its own. That's where we need to look at pluralism along with dialogue across different frames, different epistemologies, different sections of society. And that onus would somewhere have to be with those who are creating our ecosystems, where the decisions are being taken of how to govern, whether it is governance in terms of providing healthcare and services and goods and so on, and their distribution in society, or governing knowledge and knowledge frames. Those dialogic frames, and there are possibilities of that. There are possibilities of creating institutions which can be dialogue, but we need institutions of dialogue. For that, it's not just one vision of one universal science across the world or one universal medicine, even across India, forget about the world, as being desirable, because dialogue will happen only when there are differences. And then the dialogue happens across them, so they learn from each other and strengthen themselves in that challenge and in that process. To come to your point about methodology, talked about the fact that there is uncertainty. It can't be Newtonian or even Einsteinian, because biology, ecology, and medicine have inherent in them the variations of each individual and of different dimensions of biology that it goes. Therefore, while we standardize, and therefore I'm also submitting that I don't think RCT is that evil. It's painted absolutely black in some discourse. The RCT is necessary to take care of that uncertainty. You create a lab situation so that you remove the uncertainty and say, okay, is there a basic objective efficacy in this particular medicine or this particular plant and its products? Having done that then, but there is so much more that will go into making it really effective on the ground in real life. But the bottom line has to be that, is it efficacious? And for that, an RCT is an important tool, important methodological tool and design. But when we expect too much from it, when the industry uses it for its own ends, when scientists for their own professional interest find it useful to do an RCT, and now you have clinical trial companies. So of course they will posit it as the only way of looking at things. But so if our methods of, whether it is within modern medical methods or it is Ayurvedic methods, they have to be, look at their complementarity and then use them within the limits that they provide for and within the limits that they're rationally applicable. So, what I'm putting in this broad framing is really at one level agreeing with you in terms of the universality of science as the scientific approach, which is critical, and I don't think anybody was contesting that. But the fact of how the roots of the sciences are different, what I'm also positive, but there's a dynamicity within sciences as well. And therefore, let's look at the commonalities as they exist today. And thereby, then we get these two different roots of pluralism and standardization and dialogue between them. I think I'll stop with that, Manindra and Shelja. If there's anything else that you want to take on as an issue at the closing end, or if Sujatha or Professor Patwardhan, if you would like to make some final comments. Okay, we are 8:09. So maybe we'll close for today. And clearly, I think we're leaving quite a lot of questions hanging. So we can look forward to another session of something like this. And I hope Manindra and Shelja will give thought to that.
Sure.
Thank you. I think it was extremely interesting. And I think moved the kind of discussion that we often have on issues of, Ayurveda versus allopathy and so on to a different kind of level. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to all the three speakers and to Manindra for his interventions.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for the
experience.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Before we just leave, if you want to know more about the future seminars or talks about from our group and forum, kindly drop your email ID at the chat box so I can always inform you of the upcoming events. And thank you, everybody, for joining. This was an initiative by Dr. Thakur in 2021, which got fruition in 2022. So we are happy to be here. And thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for watching the video. Do like and share our video. For more seminars and talk, please subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, comment on the video and don't forget to press the bell icon for future updates.